A local man was found dead yesterday. It's my fault. I needed to go for a walk that day. It didn't matter that I had been exhausted the day before. It didn't matter that I was supposed to have one of my friends over in a matter of hours. I needed to go on a walk that day. Lincoln Avenue. Just 2 words. That's all I could remember thinking. Lincoln Avenue. A completely random, inconsequential street name that I'm sure you could find in almost any state across the country. But when I woke up that morning, I couldn't think of anything but that one name, Lincoln Avenue. Like always, part of me just wanted to ignore it, to ignore the name, and the voice that, for the moment, gently whispered it to me, as though the voice was speaking from within my mind. If it was just for my sake, I would have, please believe me when I say that. It wasn't just for my sake, though. My dad had been in the hospital 2 weeks prior for a head injury. I could still remember the call I'd gotten from my sister when it happened. "Dude, you need to get to Flower Hospital now." Why? Finally decided to get that stick out of your... Just shut up and listen. Dad fell and hit his head. He must have been working on the roof or something. What? I thought he was getting some contractors to work on that. Well, apparently not, Dan. Get to the hospital now. They're taking him to the emergency room now. If past events were any indication, my dad's life depended entirely on what I did within the next 24 hours. I'd be lying if I said that he and I had the closest relationship even before the incident, let alone in the last 5 years since I'd moved out. I was sure in some way he still resented me for leaving just as much as I still partly resented him for shutting down. Aside from the past few months, we'd barely even made any effort to repair our friendship, let alone what could be called a father-son relationship. But he was the only parent I had left, and we were finally starting to love each other again. I needed him. More than that, Kathy needed him. They'd been each other's rocks after everything happened, and I knew how badly it had affected all of us when Mom died. I couldn't afford to let myself or Kathy go through that again. On any other day, the weather outside would have been idyllic. I guess it still was. Blue skies, a breeze just gentle enough to keep me cool, while the sun hung high above. Only a few small clouds peppering the expanse of blue, and a few birds singing their songs. It felt almost insulting, considering what was about to happen. As I took my first step and passed the borders of my yard, I heard all the confirmation I needed to know that I was beyond the point of no return. The voice was whispering the street again. Lincoln Avenue. I'd already walked about a mile when my phone began ringing again. Even without looking, I could almost guarantee that it was going to be Kathy again, calling for the 100th time to give me some update to Dad's condition. I didn't bother answering. I was in no mood to hear that things hadn't gotten any better, or worse, that he had gone fully unresponsive. The clock was already ticking. Seeing how fast it was winding down wouldn't change that. It wasn't a simple straight shot. At certain intervals, I would hear the voice calling out again, instructing me to go left or right, down paths I had driven past countless times, routes that I could drive in minutes or less, now passing by uncomfortably slowly. Right, left, right, straight. Before I'd even realized it, an hour had passed, and I was trekking on the side of busy street. Restaurants, stores, and gas stations littered either side of the road. Cars whizzed past me as the sidewalk became wider, and I was no longer the only pedestrian walking along it. Some walked dogs, others jogged, and others still casually walked along as they remained glued to their phones. None paid any mind to me. Out of sheer habit, I pulled my own phone out and checked my Steps app to see just how far I had gone. According to it, I had traveled only a little more than 3 miles. 3 miles, a little over an hour of walking. I wondered just how much further I had to go. As it turned out, it wasn't much farther at all. I had been carefully checking each street sign I passed on my forced pilgrimage, hoping each time that the one I passed would be my ever-so-sought Lincoln Avenue. 2 hours in, I finally found it. Just past an old apartment complex, a small green sign said in partially chopped lettering, Lincoln Avenue. My chest tightened as I read the name aloud. Doubts began to creep into my mind as I clenched my fist. Was I really doing this again? What if I was wrong? Maybe I was just going through some kind of waking nightmare, hearing things that weren't there. Lord knows I hadn't been getting much sleep in the last few weeks. I remembered reading in a medical report somewhere that the human mind begins to break down even after just 24 hours of not getting any sleep, and that there was potential of both visual and auditory hallucinations after 48. The same report claimed that while you could theoretically survive on just 4 hours of sleep for every 24, you could still feel the negative effects of sleep deprivation over an extended time. Maybe that included the aforementioned hallucinations. I couldn't remember the last time I'd slept more than 5 hours after Dad was admitted. Maybe that's all this was. 209 Lincoln Avenue. Red roses. The voice was back, and the illusion was shattered. I could justify hearing a random street like before. The name had to be common. This, however, was specific. An exact address. And based on the sound of it, something to identify the specific house I needed to go to. I still wanted to believe that this was just a bunch of hallucinations. I really did. But I could still remember the times I had done this before. What had happened the one time I refused. I could see Mom. Shattered. Just. The street was just like any other you'd drive by on the way to something actually significant. Rows upon rows of houses, a few small intersections marking the various blocks, a mix of trimmed and not so trimmed grass, and the occasional tree in the front yard. The sky was blue, plenty of clouds. I could hear unseen birds singing their songs as what normally would be an idyllic, practically picturesque day moved along undisturbed. If I hadn't known any better, I may have stopped to enjoy a walk through the neighborhood. As it was, I couldn't enjoy my time here. I had work to do, and I just wanted it over with. To any unsuspecting eyes, which was realistically all of them, there was nothing interesting to see about me. A stranger passing by, maybe out getting some exercise in. Ideally, I would be so unremarkable that whoever lived here wouldn't even realize I had crossed paths with them. I would be just another nameless and blurry face, too unclear to even remember right. I would need that indifference. Each house I passed was mostly the same. Simple, 1 to 2 stories, a side driveway that fit multiple cars, and some variation of flowers. The neighborhood didn't look high-end, but it wasn't struggling either. Most of the houses had some variation of one person mowing their lawns or otherwise doing yard work, or children running and playing while adults looked on. I felt the guilt of what was happening well up in me as some of the adults raised their hands in polite courtesy waves I had to fight myself to return. This was supposed to be a safe space, a place where families could enjoy their time together. And here I was, prowling like a lion seeking to tear it all apart. I'd long stopped trying to separate myself from the voice's consequences. There was no point to it. I may have abhorred the choices I made and what they would lead to, but I made them regardless. All I could do was tell myself that my father was worth what was coming, that my sister was worth it, because I knew I wasn't. One by one, I passed the houses, watching the numbers, noting the flowers. 199, pink lilies. 201, blue hydrangeas. 203, white orchids. 205, red spider lilies. 207, black roses. 209 Lincoln Avenue was like many of the houses I had passed. Well kept, in good repair. A flower bed neatly tended to, red roses vibrant, and almost seeming to sparkle in the sunlight. At the end of the street was a set of guardrails blocking off a small set of woods, just small enough that I could see through the cracks to an open field. My heart felt heavy enough to sink into my shoes as I observed the house. It had been freshly painted, a chalk drawing of two large stick figures and a third, smaller one smiled brightly in the driveway. What was I doing? I couldn't do this. I had to do this. I couldn't do this. I had to do this. Hey, buddy, can I help you? This voice wasn't in my head. It was right to the side of me. A man's voice. Turning to look at the man, I came face to face with a well-kept man in his mid-30s, maybe 10 years older than myself. He had short, neatly trimmed black hair with an equally maintained beard. He wore a plain, featureless white shirt and was carrying what looked to be a bag of groceries. Restaurant, do it. The voice half instructed, half demanded. Its tone was different this time. Gone was the whisper, and in its place was an almost childlike eagerness. I recognized the tone immediately, and my stomach churned. Oh, hey, I replied, feigning a confused expression as I looked from the house back to the man, a mix of impatience and frustration on his face. I think I got turned around somewhere. I'm looking for that new steakhouse that was moved in a few weeks ago. I lied. Immediately the man's expression softened, and he even chuckled to himself as he shook his head. Lincoln's Steakhouse? He asked. I nodded. Yeah, you're not the first to have wound up here. You got a phone on you? He asked. Despite every bone in my body telling me to stop, to turn and run, I pulled my phone from my pocket, opened the GPS app, and handed it to the man. I watched as the man punched in some unknown address into my phone with his free hand, resisting every urge to snatch it away. I could practically hear the voice salivating in anticipation as the man handed my phone back to me. There you go, man. Should be good to go now. I faked a laugh as I rubbed the back of my head. Sorry about that. Didn't mean to intrude or anything. The man shook his head and waved the apology aside. You're like the third guy that's happened this month. Not a big deal. His guard was down. I could tell by his tone. It was now or never. Dan, I said, introducing myself as I extended my hand. I prayed my hands weren't sweating, that my heart, beating like the stampede of 1,000 frightened animals, would hold out for just a few minutes longer, that my breath would not betray the anxiety in my soul. The man glanced with seeming amusement at my hand, then, with a tired sigh, took it. Chuck, he offered kindly, shaking my hand. Chuck, my father's name. Of course, I thought. For a moment, I wondered when he had become a father, if he too had an elder son, maybe a daughter on the way. How closely did his family mirror my own? I would never get the answers to those questions. Not that I deserved them anyway. As I released Chuck's hand, a pressure released in my head, like a congestion clearing after days of thickness. The voice was silent, gone. It was finished. I hope you have a good rest of your day. I offered sheepishly. It was the first true thing I'd told Chuck since I'd met him, save my name. Chuck merely gave a polite wave of the hand, then marched up his sidewalk and towards his door. I did not watch him enter. I did not linger to see what would happen. The walk home felt longer, more exhausting. A rational mind would have said it was due to how far I had already walked. A guilty one would say it was the shame of falling back into a hated habit, one I'd tried time and time again to shake ever since that voice had become bound to me in that stupid childhood game so many years ago. The truth was probably somewhere in the middle, a mix of both physical and mental exhaustion. The sudden emptiness from the loss of the voice probably didn't help. For a moment, I hoped beyond practicality that the voice would stay gone this time, that Chuck would be its final victim, that just maybe, this time it would be satiated. I didn't want the temptation anymore, or the fear of losing anyone else. I knew that's all it was, though, just a hope. The voice always came back. Surely enough, just as I got home and opened my door, I felt a familiar, crippling weight seep into my head. I hurried and slammed the door closed and pinned my back against it, both ready and not ready for what came next. All around me I heard a sickening crunching, ripping and snapping. Phantom pains would flare in my own limbs for moments at a time, but never long enough to truly understand what he was going through. The voice moaned happily as it enjoyed its meal, either oblivious to my awareness or indifferent to it. I pictured Chuck playing with a little boy I had never seen, a wife I would never know. Tears welled in my eyes as I heard a series of pops, followed by a giddy laughter and more moaning. Even now I find myself hoping Chuck and all of my victims were already dead whenever this was happening. I could barely stand their fate as it was, to know they were alive during all this. That Mom was alive during it. I just couldn't handle it. I'm not sure how long I stayed there, curled by the door, rocking myself gently back and forth. Even after the noises stopped, I couldn't bring myself to move. Long after the light of day had stopped pouring into my home, leaving me shrouded in darkness, I was still there. I suppose I must have gotten up at some point, because the next thing I remembered was waking up in my own bed, window blinds open, still dark outside. Had I fallen asleep or simply been so out of it that I hadn't remembered going to the bedroom? A familiar ringtone snapped me out of my head. I looked beside my bed to the nightstand, my phone lighting up with Kathy's name identifying her as the caller. Though I suspected I already knew what the call was about, I answered anyway. I did the best I could to feign surprise as she told me Dad was making a recovery, that he was lucid. Just like always, the voice had kept its end of the deal. Just like I feared it would. Just like I knew it would. After a few more minutes of conversation, I wished Kathy a good night, another brief moment of sincerity. I wanted to be happy my father was alive, that Kathy would get to have him in her life for a while longer, that I would get the chance to fully reconcile our relationship, that we could be a family again. But the happiness was a shallow one. A drop in the proverbial hole that I hadn't stopped digging 14 years ago. How many bodies were in that hole now? I wondered. I desperately wanted to sleep. In my dreams I could forget what had happened, be blissfully unaware of everything if even for a few hours. Instead, I went to the internet, lying on my back as I searched for my most local news station. I wasn't sure why I was doing this. I already knew what I'd find. Maybe it was my own form of penance, my own way of forcing myself to acknowledge what I had really done. As the page loaded, I saw it. The top story. Local man found eviscerated in his home. Suspect currently unknown.